When I got my first gimbal, the ZHIYUN Weebill S, I absolutely loved going out and using it. I would go to the local park, the local beach, or a local town and shoot as much as I could. It was a great way to practice how to use the gimbal, how to use my camera, my cinematography, and my editing. But as I became better and shot more professionally, I stopped shooting for myself. It became more of a chore to go out and set up the gimbal and go out and shoot because I was doing this all week long for professional work. I'm hoping that the Zhiyun Cinepeer Weebill 3E is gonna change that. It's so small, but it can pack a big punch, and I'm hoping it will let me feel more comfortable going out and shooting again without having to lug a bunch of gear and getting those great cinematic movements that a gimbal can provide with less of the burden of setting up a big giant gimbal. I've already got my Weebill 3E balanced to use with my Sony a7 IV and the Tamron 20-40 f2.8. This is my absolute favorite gimbal lens. I love flying this lens on a gimbal. I've got a full review of it on my channel if you're interested. So we're gonna head out to the park, shoot some B-roll, and I'm gonna give a first impressions on this gimbal. I'm gonna show you the footage, and then we're gonna come back and talk a little about it. This isn't a full review, this is more of a first impressions, and also more encouragement for you to go out there and shoot more, just like I need encouragement to go out and shoot more. So let's head to the park and shoot some awesome footage. All right, so we're headed to the park now. Just initial impressions of this setup and how it feels in the hand. It's way lighter than other gimbals I've used. You know, I've used the Weebill S and I've used the Ronin S and the Ronin RS3, and this is by far lighter with the same exact camera setup. It's impressive how small this gimbal is and how well it's holding the weight of the a7 IV with the Tamron 20-40 f2.8. Now, this isn't a heavy setup, but it isn't a light setup, so I'm pretty impressed on how well it's doing. All right, so I just got to the park. I'm gonna show you how I go about shooting a B-roll video where I don't have a lot of direction and I'm just trying to show off the vibe of a location. I've got the Insta360 on my chest. I'm gonna give you a little POV look of how I'm liking the gimbal and how I shoot a video like this. So let's start shooting with the entrance of the park. So I'm starting with the entrance of the park because it's just a good way to set your scene. For a video like this, you always want to tell the audience where you are, so a nice wide establishing shot works perfect for that. It should be pretty wide and sweeping, and that just gets the viewer to know, oh, this is where we are, this is where the video is going to take place. So let's start with it. Use the joystick to tilt up a bit, get nice and wide, go out to the 20mm, and I'm shooting at 4K 60 so I can slow everything down. And we'll get that nice sweeping movement. And when I'm shooting a video with a gimbal, I always do the ninja walk, knees bent and smaller steps, just to make sure your footsteps are as smooth as possible. Got a skateboarder here, let's see if I can get a shot of him rolling past. One thing I'm noticing right off the bat is that I'm really missing an underslung handle, one that kind of sits like this. I much prefer them when I'm using a gimbal. I'm shooting a lot of low stuff and a lot of stuff where if I was shooting a talking head, I wouldn't want it, but I don't shoot a lot of talking heads on gimbals, so I'd really prefer an underslung handle. ZHIYUN does make one, it's just gonna be a bit extra. I personally prefer when gimbals come with them, but that's not something you see often, and that's really why I love the original Weebill S so much, and I'm kind of upset they've moved away from that design a bit. We got roller skaters coming up, let's try to get them as they roll past. Now, if you're curious where I am, I'm in Prospect Park, which is basically the central park of Brooklyn. It's really beautiful here. There's lakes, there's a lot of people around. It's a beautiful day, so it's really the perfect day to test out a product like this. All right, we're coming up upon the lake now. I'm gonna get some shots. Maybe there's some birds. I'm gonna get some shots of the water and the area around it. And that's a huge part of the park, so I think it's important to show in this little cinematic B-roll sequence of the park. There's a guy fishing over here. We might be able to get some cool shots of him. Zoom in a bit to get a little more compression. Once again, this is a time where that undersling handle would be super nice. I'm noticing a bit now that it's a little more sensitive than I like, which is really good for when you're shooting fast motion, but I'm going to dial down the sensitivity a bit in the settings, and it's really nice that you have the option to do that. I don't know if you can see it from here, there's a lot of turtles on that rack. My lens might be a little too wide, but let's try to see what we can get. I'm going to get the gimbal nice and close to the water and put it in more of an underslung mode, like this, where the handle's on the top and the camera's on the bottom. I am really enjoying the mode button on the gimbal to switch between the types of modes. It's got a deep press, you're not accidentally pressing it, but when you want to press it, it's super easy to hit. And just like every gimbal, this is the typical modes, pan, follow, follow, and some of the more fun ones like vortex. I don't know if you can see it on the Insta360, but there's an old bridge over here that you can kind of see through the trees. So we'll get a nice shot going up towards it. And we'll switch it into follow mode for this, so we can start low and get high and get a nice smooth movement as we do it. Now you may notice, I keep hitting the record button on the camera. I actually just remembered I do have it hooked up with the Bluetooth on the A7 IV. So there's a record button right here, and I can start and stop recording from the gimbal. There's also a few camera settings that you can control this way. I typically just control it on the camera because my muscle memory works much quicker that way. But if you spend a lot of time with the gimbal, you will have a lot of control over your camera, at least if it's a Sony, through the gimbal controls, which is always super nice. So for this video, I think it'll be really nice to end at a destination. I'm at the Prospect Park Boathouse, which is a really iconic area. So we're gonna get some final shots of the boathouse, head back to my apartment, edit this video, and share some of my final thoughts on this gimbal. So you've seen the B-roll sequence, you can get an idea of what the Zhiyun Cinepeer 3E can do, and how I go about shooting a B-roll sequence like this. But now I want to talk a little bit more about this gimbal. Now Zhiyun did send me this gimbal, and therefore this isn't a full review. This is just kind of a quick first impressions of what it was like using this gimbal for the first time. So let's talk about it a bit more. Now right off the bat, this isn't a gimbal that most professionals are going to want to use. They're going to want something a little bigger and a little more heavy duty so they can really rig it up. This is, however, the perfect beginner gimbal. It's perfect for someone who's picking up their first gimbal and wants to get into using smoother movements or more complex camera movements for the first time. The overall size and handling of this gimbal really lends itself to that beginner. You're not going to feel like it's a burden to set up or balance or carry with you, which means you'll use it more, and the best way to get better at something is by doing it more often. So the more you're going to be able to use this gimbal because it's smaller and lighter, the better you'll get at using a gimbal. There are a lot of beginner gimbals out there, but I really like Zhiyun's way of doing things. The Cinepeer 3E has a lot of features that you'd expect in any professional gimbal, and I'd be confident using this on a professional shoot if I needed to. This means that as you go from a beginner to a more advanced shooter, this gimbal will grow with you and you won't feel like you need to upgrade right away, which is always super important when you're investing in gear. While I do think this gimbal is catered a bit more towards beginners, that doesn't mean that it's not going to make its way into my professional workflow. I really see myself using this gimbal on shoots where I don't expect I need a lot of gimbal shots, but I still want to have a gimbal with me just in case. Because it's so light and small, it's really easy to pack in a bag and it doesn't take much space up if I don't end up using it. This is likely how I'll be using the Weebill Cinepeer 3E moving forward. It's a small gimbal that I can keep in my bag and have with me if I need it, and if I don't use it, it doesn't feel like it's a burden to carry and take along. It's also really important to remember that gimbals are just tools. While I really enjoy using them and get a lot of great shots with a gimbal, you don't need a gimbal to make a great video, but they are really nice to have. With that being said, go and create some content. Thanks for watching.